Why was she drawing so many stares? And why did the laughter sting more than she'd ever admit? The base commissary doors slid open with a tired sigh as Miranda Reeves stepped inside, her figure cutting quietly through the morning bustle. She wore a jacket that didn't belong to this era. Faded olive green, sleeves frayed, edges worn thin where time had scraped away the fabric's authority. A ghost of a patch clung to the left breast, its stitching pale and nearly invisible. To most eyes, it was just an old surplus jacket. To hers, it was a lifetime. She moved slowly down the aisles, her right leg dragging almost imperceptibly, a limp she'd learned to disguise but never quite eliminate. The commissary smelled of fresh bread and cheap coffee. Soldiers in pressed uniforms filled the space with their chatter, carts squeaking against the polished floor. Somewhere near the entrance, two young lieutenants spotted her. Their conversation shifted. One elbowed the other, a smirk, a whisper. Looks like she raided her grandfather's closet. More like the thrift bin on discount day. She heard every word. She always did. But Miranda kept her eyes on the shelf in front of her, cans of soup lined in rigid military formation. Her fingers brushed the labels, calculating prices with the precision of someone who'd learned to make do with less. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She just kept moving as if the laughter couldn't touch her. But beneath the quiet, a storm pressed against her ribs. These were children, barely commissioned. They didn't know the difference between a jacket pulled from a bargain rack and one that had walked through dust storms in places they'd never be allowed to admit existed. They saw frayed fabric. They didn't see the weight. The taller lieutenant's voice carried across the aisle, sharp as a paper cut. Think she's one of those stolen valor types. The other chuckled. Probably wouldn't be the first. Miranda placed two cans in her basket, the motion deliberate, controlled. Her right wrist, marked by an old surgical scar, caught the fluorescent light for a second. She adjusted her sleeve quickly. Some scars were easier to hide than others. She turned the corner into the pasta aisle. The lieutenants followed, not out of malice exactly, but out of the careless amusement of those who hadn't yet been humbled. She reached for a box of spaghetti on a high shelf. Her shoulder protested with a sharp, familiar sting. Years ago, she'd been told she might never regain full range of motion. She had learned to live with pain like an old roommate who never moved out. As she lowered the box, the hem of her sleeve rode up again. This time, both young men saw the scar. "You think that's from actual service," one whispered, "or just part of the act?" Her knuckles whitened around the box. She breathed once, twice, then placed it gently into her basket. She reached into her jacket pocket for her shopping list, and for the briefest second, a faded photograph slid into view before she tucked it away again. 5 soldiers, desert camo, faces half shrouded by tactical gear. A helicopter behind them with its markings deliberately blurred before development. The kind of photo that existed only in hidden files and private memories. The lieutenants didn't notice the photograph. They were too busy nudging each other, enjoying their own echo chamber. She moved toward the dairy section. They followed. "Classic stolen valor prep," one of them said now, no longer bothering to lower his voice. "Bet she's heading to the VA after this. Try to squeeze benefits out of some made-up story." He wasn't entirely wrong. She was heading to the VA, just not for the reasons he imagined. At 11:00 sharp, she had another appeal hearing. Another round of bureaucratic denial wrapped in polite language. Her records were locked away behind classification levels even administrators couldn't access. 3 appeals had ended the same way. "We're sorry, ma'am. There's nothing we can do without proper documentation." Documentation that didn't officially exist. She closed the dairy case with quiet finality, a carton of eggs in her basket. Her limp grew slightly more noticeable as she adjusted her weight. The morning was already heavy. At the checkout line, a retired master sergeant worked the register. His eyes lingered on the shadow above her left pocket, the ghost of a unit patch. He said nothing, just scanned her items with practiced efficiency. But his silence wasn't mocking. it was knowing. "Have a good day, ma'am," he said as he handed her the receipt. Her voice came out rough from disuse. "You too." She turned toward customer service to verify her base address, a formality that had somehow never stuck in their system. Behind her, she could still hear the lieutenants. Their jokes weren't as sharp now, but they continued, like static in the background of her life. The line at customer service was slow. She shifted her weight to her left leg, easing the pressure off the right, her gaze unfocused. Time folded in on itself. She wasn't in a commissary anymore. She was back in the desert. The wind was full of grit. Aviation fuel burned her throat. "Captain Reeves, extraction window is closing. We either go now or we don't go at all." The memory dissolved as the clerk called, "Next." She stepped forward, ID in hand. The clerk, Alicia, early 20s, bright eyes, freshly trained, smiled politely. "Active duty or dependent?" "Veteran," Miranda said. "I'll need your veteran ID card, or DD-214. Miranda opened the folder she carried, producing official-looking letters with Department of Defense seals. "My records are under special classification. These are the only documents I'm authorized to carry." Alicia faltered. "I'm sorry, but we need standard documentation. Let me get my supervisor." Behind Miranda, the lieutenants were still there, watching, listening. Their earlier amusement shifted into something crueler now that they had an audience. "Some people will claim anything for a 10% discount," one of them said loudly. A few shoppers chuckled. Even a clerk at the next counter smirked. The supervisor arrived, older, efficient. She frowned at the documents. "These don't meet our requirements. You'll need to contact the VA directly." "That's why I'm here," Miranda replied, her voice calm but threaded with fatigue. The supervisor handed the folder back with polite finality. As Miranda tucked the folder into her jacket, the edge of a challenge coin flashed briefly, not the tourist kind sold in base gift shops. This one was heavy, rare, the kind you only received in places no one talked about. She turned, groceries in hand, facing the growing crowd. Some looked away, some stared. The lieutenants wore smirks that faltered under her steady gaze. She straightened her shoulders. Years of training slid back into place like a weapon being assembled. She walked toward the exit, chin lifted, carrying silence like armor. And then everything stopped. A tall figure in a 4-star uniform entered the commissary, flanked by aides. General Marcus Harris. Silver hair, presence like carved stone. His eyes swept the room automatically, the instinct of someone who'd commanded for decades. He barely registered her at first. Then his gaze caught the faint outline above her heart. He froze, the document in his hand lowered slowly. The aides took 2 more steps before realizing their general had stopped dead in his tracks. And in the space of a heartbeat, the room shifted. General Harris, a man whose salute was reserved for the rarest of circumstances, snapped to attention. His hand rose sharply to his brow in a perfect, formal salute. The commissary fell silent. Miranda stopped mid-step, grocery bags heavy in her hands. Civilian or not, the muscle memory was instant. She returned the salute with flawless precision. "Captain Reeves," the general said, his voice carrying across the room. "Spectre Group, Tyran 3. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition, one that very few in the world could make. The lieutenant's smirks vanished. The crowd held its breath. 22 years collapsed in an instant. Miranda stood straighter. Her eyes met his. "Yes, sir." The commissary had no idea what they were witnessing, but they felt it. Something legendary had just surfaced from the shadows. Why did the general's voice sound like it carried 20 years of ghosts? The commissary, moments ago a chorus of chatter and shuffling carts, had fallen utterly still. General Marcus Harris lowered his salute with the same deliberate control that had once directed combat operations across continents. Miranda followed suit, her grocery bag still dangling from her left hand, the faint tremor in her fingers betraying what her face refused to show. The aides exchanged uncertain glances, trying to make sense of the moment. The young lieutenants, the same ones who had mocked her jacket minutes earlier, now stood frozen, the blood draining from their faces as reality caught up to their arrogance. "Captain Reeves," the general repeated, his tone softer now, almost reverent. "I thought Spectre Group was gone." Miranda didn't answer right away. The weight of 2 decades pressed between them, operations sealed, names erased, missions written in invisible ink. She nodded once, controlled. "We were, sir, officially." The general dismissed his aides with a single gesture. "Wait for me outside." His voice left no room for hesitation. They obeyed instantly, leaving the two of them standing at the center of a commissary that had turned into a silent theater. The general took one step closer, his eyes locked on the ghosted patch above her heart. "It was your unit," he said quietly. "Tyran extraction, 3 helicopters down, hostiles closing in on every side. You held the perimeter long enough to carve us a way out." The words pulled at something deep inside her. The sandstorm, the smoke, the screaming rotors trying to lift through choking grit. Her team, 6 of them ghosts in the dark, buying time for 32 souls trapped behind enemy lines. Miranda's voice was steady. "Yes, sir." He inhaled slowly, as if remembering the heat and the chaos himself. "I was on the 3rd helicopter. We shouldn't have made it out, but we did because of you." Conversations at the edges of the room began to flicker back, whispers spreading like ripples across still water. Soldiers, families, clerks, everyone in the commissary understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. The lieutenants didn't move. Their earlier smirks had been replaced with the stunned look of people who suddenly realized they'd been laughing at a monument. The general gestured toward the small cafe tucked into the corner. "Would you join me for coffee, Captain?" She hesitated for the briefest moment. She wasn't used to invitations anymore, especially not from people who remembered. "Of course, sir." They crossed the commissary together, the crowd parting instinctively like troops stepping aside for a procession. Heads turned, eyes followed. Miranda could feel the change in the air, not pity, not curiosity, respect. The kind that was earned in silence, not demanded with words. They sat at a small corner table. The general ordered black coffee. Miranda did the same. A young airman behind the counter fumbled nervously with the cups, clearly overwhelmed by the presence of a 4-star general. As the airman hurried away, Harris leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "I've wondered for years what happened to your team after the debriefing. Your files were buried so deep I couldn't even access them." "That was by design," Miranda replied evenly. "Spectre Group operated under triple-blind protocols. Even our existence was compartmentalized." "For good reason," Harris said. His voice softened, taking on the tone of a man who'd carried a secret too long. "If that operation had failed, the world would look very different right now. Diplomats, officers, myself. You changed history that night and no one even knew your names." The airman set the coffees down and retreated quickly. Miranda wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the heat more than the drink. She'd lived years in the cold spaces between acknowledgement and oblivion. "What brings you back to Fort Braxton?" Harris asked. "Last intel I had placed you retired in Colorado." "Medical appeal," Miranda answered, her tone clipped but honest. "VA can't process injuries from missions they can't see. My right leg and shoulder were damaged during the Tyran extraction. The medical records exist, but they're classified beyond administrative clearance. 3 appeals denied." The general's jaw tightened. "They're denying you because we buried the truth." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Harris reached into his uniform jacket, pulling out his phone. His movements shifted from reflective to surgical, the decisive rhythm of a man used to making things happen. He dialed waited half a second, then spoke with the authority of someone who didn't ask. "This is General Harris. I need immediate action on a personnel matter. Yes, that level of clearance. Authorization code Sierra 9 Delta 40 Tango. I want everything on Spectre Group declassified immediately. Specifically personnel injury records for Operation Tyran 2003. Priority directive." He listened briefly. "I understand the protocols. Override them. This is a direct order." He ended the call and slid the phone away, his gaze steady on Miranda. "Bureaucracy moves slow, but not this time. Your service won't stay buried any longer." For the first time in years, she felt something unexpected stir beneath her composed exterior, not relief exactly. Something deeper, a weight shifting, a fortress door, long locked, beginning to creak open. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Two figures appeared at the edge of the cafe, the lieutenants. Their earlier swagger was gone. They stood at attention a respectful distance away, waiting like chastened cadets. Harris noticed them and raised an eyebrow at Miranda. She gave a small nod. "Granted," he said. The taller lieutenant stepped forward. His voice was tight but controlled. "Ma'am, General, request permission to speak." "Go ahead," Harris said. The young man turned fully to Miranda. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology for my disrespectful behavior earlier. There is no excuse for how we spoke to you or about you." His companion joined him, his cheeks flushed with shame. "We acted shamefully, ma'am. We failed to uphold the respect owed to anyone who served, especially someone like you." Miranda studied them quietly. Behind their discomfort, she saw the raw clay of future officers, arrogant now, perhaps, but capable of becoming something more. "You couldn't have known," she said finally, her voice calm, even. "That was the point of units like mine. We operated in shadows so others could work in the light." "That doesn't excuse our behavior," the taller one said quickly. "No," she agreed, "but it means you can learn from it." General Harris nodded slightly. "A lesson worth learning early in your careers. Appearances can lie. Shadows can hold giants." "Yes, sir," both lieutenants replied in unison. "Return to your duties," Harris ordered. They saluted and left, their exit quiet, their lesson unforgettable. Miranda watched them go, a small flicker of something like satisfaction stirring deep inside. Not revenge, not vindication, just the knowledge that, for once, the truth had spoken for itself. Across the commissary, the atmosphere had transformed. Veterans offered subtle nods as they passed the cafe. Enlisted personnel straightened instinctively when they saw her. Her jacket hadn't changed, but the way people saw it had. Harris lifted his cup. "To the ones who did the work no one saw." She met his eyes, lifted her cup, "And to the ones who remembered." The coffee was bitter, but for once it tasted right. Why did the weight of a single jacket feel heavier than the gear she once carried into war zones? 3 months later, Fort Braxton woke the way it always did, like clockwork. Reveille echoing through the chill air. Recruits jogging in tight formation, their breath fogging the early light. Flags rising on poles in crisp unison. Engines humming, boots striking asphalt in disciplined rhythm. The base moved like a living organism, every part clicking into place. But for Miranda Reeves, everything had changed. She stepped through the commissary doors once more, the same way she had countless mornings before. Same faded jacket, same routine, and yet not the same. The jacket, once nearly threadbare to anonymity, had been carefully cleaned and preserved. The ghost of a patch above her heart had been restored, its emblem subdued but clear now, as if time itself had decided to stop erasing her. Below it gleamed a small, newly pinned Presidential Unit Citation. 20 years late but finally visible. Her gait was steadier now. Physical therapy, authorized only after General Harris's phone call that day, had begun to rebuild what years of neglect had eroded. The limp was still there, a quiet companion, but it no longer defined her walk. As she crossed the commissary threshold, conversations dipped for a heartbeat, not out of mockery now, but out of quiet recognition. Some saluted, some nodded, most just looked. The story had traveled far without being officially told. Not everyone knew the details, of course. Much of it remained buried under layers of redacted lines and black ink, but enough whispers had spread through the base. The woman in the old jacket wasn't just a veteran. She was part of something that didn't have a name for 2 decades. "Good morning, Captain Reeves," Alicia called from behind the customer service counter, smiling warmly. Miranda returned the smile, something she hadn't done here in years. "Morning, Alicia." She grabbed a basket and started her routine, moving down the aisles with practiced efficiency. Soup, pasta, eggs, a rhythm that had once been her shield now felt almost peaceful. Near the canned goods section, she spotted a familiar face, one of the lieutenants, the taller one, Harmon, alone this time, brow furrowed as he examined prices like a man finally understanding how far a junior officer's paycheck really stretched. He looked up, their eyes met, recognition flickered, embarrassment, resolve. "Captain Reeves," he said, approaching with crisp formality. "Lieutenant Harmon," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a slight warmth to it now, a softness born from the passing of a lesson well learned. "I wanted to tell you," he began, "your case study is now part of our professional development curriculum. General Harris introduced it himself." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Is that so?" "Yes, ma'am. They don't share the classified details, obviously, but they use your story to teach us about making assumptions, about respect, about recognizing service that isn't always visible." Miranda absorbed his words slowly. She had spent years fighting for acknowledgement, only to find that the real impact came not from awards or ceremonies, but from stories being told to those who would lead next. "Good lessons for any officer," she said quietly. "They are, ma'am, especially for me," he admitted, his shoulders straightening. "I won't forget it." She nodded once. "That's what matters." He offered a respectful salute and stepped away. This time there was no trace of mockery in his bearing, only respect. As Miranda continued her shopping, she noticed something subtle but powerful. The way people looked at her had changed permanently. Not everyone understood why. Some never would. But the base had a long memory once a truth like this surfaced. She moved through the checkout line. The same retired master sergeant was behind the register. His eyes found her patch immediately, and he grinned beneath his cap. "Morning, Captain," he said, scanning her items. "Good to see that getting the respect it deserves." "Morning, Master Sergeant," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "Things have improved." "About time," he muttered. "Some of us suspected what that fade-out patch was, but you don't ask about those things unless someone wants to tell you." "Appreciate the discretion," Miranda said. "It's strange having it acknowledged after so long." He handed her the bag. The good ones never need to say it loud. She turned from the counter, adjusting her grip on the groceries. That was when a young female officer approached, nervous energy radiating from her posture. Lieutenant bars gleamed on her chest, and her eyes carried the kind of intensity Miranda remembered from herself decades earlier. "Excuse me," the young woman said. "Are you Captain Miranda Reeves from Spectre Group?" Miranda studied her quickly, intelligence insignia on the uniform, bright, determined, a mind shaped for sharp edges. "I am," Miranda answered. The lieutenant snapped to attention, delivering a salute that was crisp and sincere. "Lieutenant Sarah Mercer, ma'am, 103rd Military Intelligence Battalion." Miranda returned the salute automatically, muscle memory stronger than thought. "At ease, Lieutenant. How can I help you?" "I've been studying your extraction techniques," Mercer said, her voice quick but respectful. "They've incorporated the declassified portions of Operation Tyran into our updated field manuals. Your innovations in limited resource extractions are now standard training." For the first time in years, Miranda felt something warm rise beneath the surface. Not pride exactly, but a quiet sense of legacy. Her team's desperate improvisations in the Iranian desert were now lessons. "I'm glad what we learned the hard way is being passed on," Miranda said. "They are, ma'am," Mercer said, her expression glowing with admiration. "I'm part of a training development team working on updated protocols. I was wondering if you might consider speaking to my platoon. Your insight would be invaluable." Miranda hesitated. 20 years of instinctive silence pressed against the idea. Talking openly about her service felt almost like breaking an oath. But something had shifted. General Harris's salute, the declassification orders, the restored patch, the lieutenant's words about lessons. She looked at Mercer, young, capable, hungry to learn, and saw in her the same sharp light that had once burned in her own team. "I'd be happy to," Miranda said finally. "Within classification limits, of course." Mercer's face lit up. "That would be incredible, ma'am, truly." They exchanged contact information. The lieutenant saluted once more and left, her step light with excitement. Miranda stood there for a moment, groceries in hand, watching her go. She hadn't expected this slow unfolding of something she thought had been buried with her team. She had carried their silence for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to speak, even partially, of their work. As she stepped out into the crisp morning light, the sun cut sharp lines across Fort Braxton. She passed a group of young soldiers who instinctively straightened at the sight of her jacket and the now visible citation. No whispers, no laughter, just the unspoken language of recognition. For the first time in years, she didn't shrink into the background. She walked forward. The jacket had not changed, but the world around it finally had. Why did the past feel louder on quiet mornings? The sun was higher now, casting hard lines across the concrete as Miranda walked toward the parking lot with her groceries. Her stride was steady, but inside, memories stirred like dust in a room she hadn't opened in years. Every time she passed through these gates, it was as if Fort Braxton itself whispered fragments of the life she had once lived. Not the public life, the classified one. The one that left no uniforms, no medals, no public funerals, only scars and silence. She was halfway to her car when she spotted a familiar figure cutting across the courtyard, General Harris, walking briskly alongside another officer. He caught sight of her and, without hesitation, altered his path. "Captain Reeves," he called, his voice carrying the weight of command and respect all at once. Miranda stopped, adjusted the grocery bags in her hands and straightened instinctively. "General." He smiled faintly. "Just the person I wanted to see." She tilted her head slightly. "Everything all right, sir?" "There's been a development," he said, lowering his voice just enough to signal that what came next mattered. "We've located Specialist Rodriguez's family." The name hit her like a quiet shockwave. Rodriguez, her team's communications specialist, barely 23 at the time of the Tyran extraction. Bright, talkative, always cracking dry jokes into the comms to keep the tension down. He hadn't made it out. Miranda's fingers tightened on the grocery bag handles. "His family," she repeated softly. "With the partial declassification, we can finally arrange proper recognition for his sacrifice," Harris said. "His daughter will receive his Silver Star next month." Miranda blinked. "His daughter?" "She's 26 now," Harris said, watching her carefully. "Grew up believing her father died in a training accident. Now, at least, she'll know he died a hero, even if she can't know everything." Miranda nodded slowly, the image of Rodriguez's grin flashing through her mind. She remembered him crouched in the back of the transport, headset pressed against his ear, calmly calling out enemy movements while the night burned around them. "That matters," she whispered. "It matters a great deal." "We'd like you to be part of the ceremony," Harris continued. "As the last surviving member of the team, Your presence would mean everything to his family." Miranda's answer was immediate. "Of course, sir, I'd be honored." The general's expression softened. "Good. My aide will send you the details. It's time the world, or at least a small corner of it, hears his name properly." He gestured toward the insignia on her jacket. "I see you've restored the patch." She glanced down at it. "Yes, sir," seemed appropriate, now that some of it isn't buried anymore. "It suits you, Captain," he said with quiet finality. "Always did." They walked a few steps together before Harris glanced at his watch. "I've got a briefing in 10 minutes, but there's something else I want you to consider. We're establishing a specialized training program, extraction operations under complex conditions. Your input would be invaluable in designing the curriculum." Miranda hesitated. "Teaching was never my specialty, sir." "Experience is what we need," he countered gently. "The kind you can't find in any manual. Think about it." He left her with that thought, striding toward headquarters with the same certainty he carried into every battlefield. She stood there a moment longer, the bags growing heavier in her hands, her mind turning over his words. Training program, curriculum, passing on what had once been unspeakable. For so long she had defined herself by what she could not say, what she could not wear openly, what she could not prove. But now pieces of the wall were coming down, not completely, never completely. Some shadows were permanent, but cracks had formed and light was finding its way in. She placed the groceries carefully in her trunk and caught her reflection in the car window. The face looking back was older, weathered but steadier. Her shoulders no longer slumped beneath the weight of unseen history. The restored patch caught the sunlight, and for the first time she didn't look away from it. As she drove through the base, her mind wandered back to Rodriguez, and Callahan, and Way, and Decker. The names were carved somewhere inside her, unspoken for decades. Now one of those names would finally echo out into the world where it belonged. The following weeks moved quietly but purposefully. Between medical appointments, Miranda found herself invited into spaces she had never imagined entering again. Officer training classrooms, briefings, small leadership panels where young lieutenants and captains listened with rapt attention as she described, in careful, measured language, how her team had extracted 32 souls through a sandstorm and enemy encirclement with half their gear failing and no air support for miles. She never shared everything. She couldn't, but what she did share carried weight, real weight. She was surprised to find she wasn't just recounting tactics. She was teaching something deeper, the quiet resilience of small teams, the clarity that came in chaos, the moral decisions made when no one was watching. She found herself pausing between sentences, letting the silence do the work. After one such session, Mercer, the young intelligence lieutenant, approached her again, notebook clutched against her chest. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say your talk today hit us hard. It wasn't just strategy, it was human." Miranda regarded her for a moment. "Because that's what war is, Lieutenant. Underneath all the noise, it's human. And if you forget that, you lose more than battles." Mercer nodded solemnly. "I'll remember that." And for the first time in years, Miranda believed that someone would. One evening, alone in her small on-base apartment, she pulled out the original Spectre Group patch from a carefully wrapped envelope. The fabric was frayed, edges curling, but the insignia was intact. Her thumb traced its shape. It wasn't just a symbol. It was 6 lives bound together in silence, their deeds filed away in rooms with no windows. She pinned it inside her closet, not to wear but to face every morning, a quiet vow to the past. She thought of Rodriguez's daughter receiving the Silver Star, of Mercer carrying forward lessons that had been written in blood and sand, of Harmon standing taller, his arrogance tempered by understanding, of Harris saluting her in front of the commissary crowd as if the years had folded into a single breath. For the first time since leaving the shadows, Miranda felt something close to peace, not the kind that erased what came before, but the kind that let it coexist with what came next. The jacket still carried its weight, but now it wasn't just hers to carry anymore. Why did the ceremony feel more like a battlefield than a stage? The air over Fort Braxton that morning was still, the kind of crisp autumn silence that carries weight. Rows of chairs had been set up on the parade ground, their metal frames catching the morning light. A temporary stage stood at the front, draped with banners. A single podium. Rows of flags. It wasn't a grand affair by Pentagon standards, but it had a solemnity that no budget could manufacture. Miranda stood at the edge of the gathering, her restored jacket fitting like a second skin. The Spectre group patch, faint but undeniable, caught a sliver of sunlight. She hadn't spoken to a crowd in years, at least not like this. She wasn't here as an instructor or a case study. She was here as the last surviving member of a unit that officially didn't exist. Specialist Rodriguez's daughter sat in the front row, 26, dark hair tied back neatly, a tailored dress that looked both formal and nervous. Her hands gripped the edges of the program booklet like a lifeline. She had grown up on a story of a father who had died in a training accident, a neatly packaged, quiet loss. Today, that story would change. General Harris approached Miranda near the stage. "You ready?" he asked quietly. She exhaled slowly. "As ready as I can be, sir." "Your presence means more to them than you know," he said, "and to me." He moved to take his place at the podium. The crowd of soldiers, families, and officials settled into silence. Harris's voice carried with the ease of a man used to commanding rooms far larger than this one. "Today," he began, "we gather not for spectacle but for truth long overdue." Miranda's chest tightened. Truth long overdue. She had lived inside that sentence for 2 decades. The general continued, speaking carefully, threading around what was still classified while revealing what could finally be told. He spoke of Operation Tyrann, not in operational detail, but in moral weight. A team of 6 operating deep in hostile territory, facing overwhelming odds, carving an extraction corridor that saved 32 lives, including his own. He paused then, his gaze sweeping the crowd. 5 of those 6 did not return home. One stands with us today. All eyes turned to Miranda. She hadn't moved, but suddenly it felt like every inch of air was heavier. Harris continued. Specialist Luis Rodriguez, communications, 23 years old. In the critical moments of that night, his calm under fire ensured that every call, every movement, every heartbeat of that extraction remained connected. Without him, no one would have made it out. Rodriguez's daughter stared at the ground, jaw trembling. The general signaled to the honor guard. The silver star rested on a small velvet cushion. As the citation was read aloud, Miranda closed her eyes briefly. The words were ceremonial, polished, but behind each sentence she saw flashes. Rodriguez crouched by the helicopter, headset pressed tight, his voice unwavering even as gunfire cracked around them. She remembered his last transmission. "I've got you. Keep moving." When Rodriguez's daughter rose to accept the medal, Harris gestured to Miranda. She stepped forward slowly, each stride deliberate. As she approached, the young woman turned toward her, eyes searching. "Ma'am," the daughter whispered, her voice breaking, "were you there?" Miranda held her gaze. "Yes," she said softly. "He was brave. He held the line for all of us." The young woman's hands shook as she accepted the medal. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her posture was proud. For the first time in her life, she wasn't carrying a lie about her father's death. Miranda stepped back as Harris saluted the family. The entire formation of soldiers followed suit in perfect synchrony. The sound of boots snapping together cut through the quiet like a rifle crack. The ceremony concluded with the measured dignity of military tradition. But for Miranda, it wasn't the speeches or the salutes that stayed with her. It was the quiet moment afterward, when Rodriguez's daughter found her again near the edge of the field. "Can I ask you something?" the young woman said. "Of course." Did he suffer?" Miranda didn't lie, she couldn't. No, it was quick. He stayed focused until the very end. He made sure we got out." The young woman nodded, biting her lip. "Thank you for telling me, for being here." Miranda placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a rare gesture of intimacy from someone who had built walls around herself for years. "He saved lives. That's the truth that matters." As the daughter walked away, clutching the medal to her chest, Miranda found herself staring at the stage. For 20 years, these moments had existed only in her memory, unacknowledged, sealed away. Now, a name had been spoken aloud. A family had received the truth. A life that had vanished into classified silence had resurfaced, even if only partially. Later that afternoon, Miranda sat alone on a bench overlooking the base airfield. Helicopters rose and landed in practiced rhythm, the thrum of their rotors vibrating through the ground. She closed her eyes. The sound no longer dragged her back to the Iranian desert. It anchored her in the present. She thought about the other names: Callahan, Way, Decker. There would never be ceremonies for all of them. Some stories would remain sealed until long after she was gone, but today proved that the silence wasn't permanent. Footsteps approached. Lieutenant Mercer appeared beside the bench, hesitant but determined. "May I?" Mercer asked. Miranda nodded. The lieutenant sat, her uniform immaculate, posture straight. "I wanted to thank you for your speech, for everything. I've been thinking about what you said in the training sessions, about the human part." Miranda glanced at her. "It's the part everyone forgets when they're young." Mercer nodded. "I've been selected for a field assignment. It's nothing like what you did, but your story, it changes how I look at the job. It makes it real." Miranda felt something shift quietly inside her, a sense of continuity. "Then it's already worth it." Mercer hesitated, then added, "I hope one day I can serve with that kind of courage." Miranda looked out toward the helicopters, their blades catching the sun. "Courage isn't something you wait for, Lieutenant. It's something you decide on when the moment comes." Mercer absorbed that in silence. When the lieutenant left, Miranda remained on the bench, watching the aircraft rise and fall. She thought of Rodriguez's daughter holding the silver star, of Harris's speech, of the salute that had once stopped a commissary cold. For years, she had believed that her story ended the night Spectre Group vanished from official records. But the truth was different. Her story wasn't over. It was unfolding again, just in a new language. Not in mission reports, not in classified briefings, but in faces, in lessons, in the weight of a medal placed into a daughter's trembling hands. The jacket she wore no longer marked her as a relic. It marked her as a witness. And witnesses, she was learning, had work to do. Why did silence feel different now? Less like exile, more like choice. The weeks after the ceremony unfolded with a quiet rhythm Miranda hadn't known in decades. Her days had shape again. Therapy sessions in the mornings, slow but steady progress. Guest lectures at the officer training school twice a week. Occasional meetings with General Harris's staff about curriculum design for the new extraction training program. She was no longer moving through the base like a ghost. People greeted her by name now, not out of forced politeness, but with a quiet reverence that surprised her every time. The jacket she'd once worn as silent armor was now something else entirely. A signal, a story. Late one evening, Miranda stood alone in one of the old training hangars, now repurposed for specialized operations instruction. Rows of mock urban structures filled the space, stacked sandbags and dim lighting creating an artificial battlefield. She had volunteered to review the layout for Harris's new program. She walked through the narrow corridors slowly, remembering. Her fingers brushed against a rough plywood wall, and for a moment the scent of oil and dust transported her back to Tehran. Not the chaos of the extraction itself, but the moment before, when the world held its breath. When 6 people glanced at one another in the dark and knew what they were about to do might end them all. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Captain Reeves." She turned. Lieutenant Mercer stood in the entryway, helmet tucked under her arm. She'd clearly come from an evening training exercise, her uniform smudged with dirt and sweat. "Lieutenant," Miranda acknowledged. Mercer approached slowly, like someone careful not to intrude. "I heard you were reviewing the course tonight. Mind if I walk with you?" Miranda gestured lightly. "It's open space. Walk." They moved together through the mock compound. Mercer listened more than she spoke, absorbing the way Miranda's eyes flicked to angles, doorways, choke points, instincts that didn't fade with age or time. "You see things differently," Mercer said finally. "No," Miranda replied. "I just see them longer." Mercer nodded, understanding more than Miranda expected. As they reached the center of the structure, Mercer asked the question that had been sitting between them for weeks. "Why did you say yes? To teaching? To all of this? You didn't have to." Miranda stopped walking. The overhead lights cast long shadows across the wooden walls. "For a long time," she said slowly, "I thought silence was loyalty, that keeping everything locked away was the only way to honor what we did, what they did. But silence, it can bury the truth too. It can bury them." Mercer studied her carefully. "You're making sure they're remembered." Miranda's gaze drifted upward to the rafters. "I'm making sure someone learns from what they gave." They continued walking, and Miranda began pointing out subtle flaws in the training course, corridors too wide, blind corners that didn't mimic real-world conditions. Mercer scribbled notes quickly, her face alive with the kind of focus Miranda remembered in Callahan, Rodriguez, Way, Decker, when they were all young and burning bright. As they finished, Mercer looked up from her notebook. "I've never seen anyone analyze a space like you do." Miranda gave a half-smile. "Experience teaches what textbooks can't." Mercer hesitated before asking, "Do you miss it, the field?" Miranda didn't answer immediately. She looked around the quiet hangar. Once, she'd lived for the adrenaline, the precision, the tight-knit bond of people who trusted each other beyond words. But with that came cost, injuries, losses, nights that never really ended. "I miss them," she said finally, "not the fight." Mercer nodded, understanding settling in like a weight she was learning to carry. The next morning, Miranda arrived at headquarters for a scheduled meeting with Harris and several program coordinators. To her surprise, Harris greeted her with uncharacteristic urgency. "Captain," he said, handing her a folder, "I wanted you to see this." Inside were drafts for the new extraction and recovery doctrine, an entire section shaped directly from her debriefs and teaching sessions. Techniques her team had improvised under fire were now formalized into doctrine. Her handwriting was still visible in the margins of some pages. Miranda flipped through the folder slowly, her chest tightening. For 20 years, the things she had done had lived only in memory and classified files. Now they were being taught to a new generation, not as legends, but as practical knowledge. "This is thorough," she said finally. Harris leaned back. "Your work changed the way we think about extractions. It's time the institution reflected that. You're not just a case study anymore, Miranda. You're part of doctrine." She exhaled slowly. "That's a strange thing to hear after all this time." Harris smiled faintly. "Strange maybe, but earned." As the meeting progressed, Miranda found herself contributing more naturally than she expected, discussing training flow, scenario realism, decision-making under pressure. The younger officers listened closely. Some scribbled notes. Others simply absorbed her words like they were hearing a living archive speak. After the meeting, Harris caught her just outside the door. "There's something else," he said. "The Pentagon's reviewing the list of classified operations for selective recognition programs. Spectre Group's Tyran mission is on the shortlist." Miranda froze. Recognition. They're considering a Presidential Unit Citation, posthumous for most, official for the first time. The thought hit her like a slow wave. For years, she had accepted that what they had done would remain locked away forever. It was how it had to be. But now, the possibility of their names being spoken, of their unit acknowledged, seemed almost unreal. "Would you support it?" Harris asked gently. Miranda looked past him, out the window where a formation of recruits marched across the field. "Yes," she said finally. "If it means their families hear the truth, then yes." That night back in her apartment, she sat in silence with the old patch in her hands. She traced the edges like she had so many nights before, but this time it wasn't an act of mourning. It was something closer to acceptance. For years she had lived in silence because she had no choice. Now she was choosing when to speak and when to stay quiet. The difference was subtle, but to her it felt like breathing for the first time. Outside her window, Fort Braxton hummed with its nightly rhythm. Lights flicked across the runways. Somewhere, a distant cadence echoed. Miranda closed her eyes, listening not to the past but to the steady present. The jacket hung by the door. Its weight would never fully disappear. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden she carried alone. Why did the letter sitting on her kitchen table make her hands shake more than enemy fire ever had? It arrived without ceremony, a plain envelope stamped with official seals, delivered through base mail like any other piece of bureaucratic correspondence. But Miranda Reeves knew the weight of official paper. She had lived a lifetime in its shadows. She stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet, crisp and formal. United States Department of Defense. The President of the United States takes pride in recognizing. Her eyes froze on the words halfway down the page. Spectre Group, Operation Tyrann, Presidential Unit Citation. Her breath caught. For 20 years, their names had existed only in hidden archives and whispered recollections between those who'd been there. Now, printed in black ink, was acknowledgement, official, public, or at least as public as the operation would allow. Rodriguez, Callahan, Way, Decker, Reeves, the last 5 lines of an unwritten history. She sat down slowly, the paper trembling in her hands. She had imagined this moment once, long ago, before giving up the idea entirely. And now that it was here, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 weeks later in Washington. It wouldn't be televised. The details of the operation would remain classified. But for the first time, their unit would stand acknowledged before the highest levels of command. She stared at the letter again, tracing her fingers over the printed names. "They'll finally hear you," she whispered. Preparation for the ceremony unfolded in a quiet blur. Harris's office coordinated the logistics with the Pentagon. Invitations were sent to surviving family members. Rodriguez's daughter confirmed she would attend. Callahan's brother, Decker's parents, frail but determined, Way's cousin, flying in from overseas. Miranda spent her days moving between therapy sessions, training reviews, and these unexpected emotional tasks. Phone calls with families she hadn't spoken to in decades, each conversation reopening old wounds and stitching them with new thread. "Ma'am," Rodriguez's daughter had said over the phone, her voice trembling with gratitude, "thank you for making sure this happened." Miranda had wanted to say, "I didn't do this alone," but all she managed was, "It's time." On the morning of the ceremony, she stood before the mirror in her modest apartment, adjusting the jacket. Not the modern base-issue windbreakers she wore on cooler mornings. The jacket. The one with Callahan's patch. The one that had walked through fire. It had been carefully restored, cleaned. Its fabric strengthened in subtle ways so it could endure this final chapter with dignity. Above the heart, the Spectre Group insignia had been restitched precisely. Not bright and new, but weathered as if time itself had paused to honor it. Below it, the small Presidential Unit Citation pin gleamed softly. Her hair, now fully silver, was tied back in the same no-nonsense bun she'd worn on operations. She caught her reflection's gaze and held it for a long moment. The woman staring back wasn't the ghost who'd walked the commissary months ago. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a soldier, a witness. The ceremony took place in a secure auditorium at the Pentagon. Rows of high-ranking officers, civilian leaders, and family members filled the seats. A simple stage stood at the front, draped in flags. It wasn't grandiose. It didn't need to be. General Harris met her at the entrance, dressed in full uniform. He offered a small nod. "Ready, Captain." She exhaled slowly, "As I'll ever be." They walked together toward the stage. The hum of quiet conversations filled the air, broken occasionally by the clicking of metals, the rustle of uniforms, the muffled sound of someone stifling tears. As she took her seat in the front row, she caught sight of Rodriguez's daughter. Their eyes met across the room, and in that silent glance, more was spoken than any speech could ever hold. The ceremony began with opening remarks from a senior Pentagon official, polished, rehearsed, respectful. He spoke of courage, sacrifice, and hidden heroes. Then came the moment. "And now we honor Spectre Group Operation Tyrann." Miranda stood with practiced precision as the presidential representative entered the stage, flanked by aides holding a ceremonial frame, the official citation. "For extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy." The words washed over her. She lived those lines, not read them. Her mind slipped back, sandstorm, radio static, the sharp bark of orders over comms, Callahan's voice steady as gunfire snapped through the night. The representative finished reading. Applause rose steady, reverent. Miranda stepped forward with General Harris to receive the framed citation on behalf of Spectre Group. As she accepted it, she felt the weight of it in her arms, heavier than it looked. The weight of 5 lives of silence cracked open. When it was her turn to speak, she approached the podium slowly. She wasn't a polished speaker. She didn't need to be. She let the silence stretch, let the room settle, then she spoke. 22 years ago, 6 people walked into a desert knowing they might not come back. 4 didn't. 1 died holding the line so others could get out. 1 kept the comms alive until the last second. 1 commanded with the kind of clarity that makes chaos pause. And the rest of us, we did what we had to do. Her voice was calm, low, steady. For 2 decades, their names lived in classified files. Today, they live here, with all of you. That's what matters. She stepped back, no flourish, no theatrics, just truth. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of sound that carried through walls, quiet, reverent, unbroken. After the ceremony, families gathered in small groups, talking softly. Photographs were taken in front of the flags. Medals were held, touched, cried over. Rodriguez's daughter approached Miranda, holding the framed citation close to her chest. "I feel like I finally met him today," she said. Miranda placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did." Nearby, Callahan's brother stood silently before the flag, his eyes wet. Decker's parents held hands tightly, whispering to each other in a language Miranda couldn't hear but understood completely. Way's cousin asked quiet questions about her, and Miranda answered every one she could. Later, as the families began to leave, Harris found Miranda standing alone near the stage. "They're going to name a wing of the training facility after Spectre Group," he said. "It's already been approved." She nodded slowly. "They'll walk through those halls without knowing all of it, but they'll feel it." "They will," Harris agreed. She looked down at the framed citation in her hands, the edges pressed against her palms. For years, she had believed the world had moved on without them. But today proved something else. The world had just been waiting for permission to remember. That night back at Fort Braxton, Miranda hung the citation on her living room wall. Not above the mantel, not in some place of grandeur. Just opposite her kitchen table, the place where she started her mornings, quiet and steady. She sat down, looked at it, and exhaled. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't heavy, it was whole. the jacket hung by the door, the patch catching a sliver of moonlight. They weren't invisible anymore. Why did the quiet feel so alive now, like the world was finally breathing with her, not around her? Months had passed since the Pentagon ceremony. Fort Braxton was still the same in so many ways. The cadence calls at dawn, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors overhead, the scent of wet concrete after rain. But for Miranda Reeves, the world had shifted, not with noise or spectacle, but with small, deliberate movements, like tectonic plates settling into a new position after decades underground. She walked through the base at sunrise, jacket zipped against the early chill. Soldiers jogged past her in formation. Some offered salutes, others simply nodded. A few younger recruits whispered to each other, eyes wide, as if they were seeing a legend they'd only heard about in passing. She didn't hide from it anymore. She walked toward the newly inaugurated Spectre Group wing, a sleek training facility built on the far edge of the base. The sun caught the brushed steel letters mounted above the entrance. She paused beneath them, her fingers brushing the cool metal. For 22 years, the name Spectre hadn't been spoken aloud outside of classified rooms. Now it stood in plain sight, not shouted, not glorified, simply there. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. Murals lined the main hallway, stylized depictions of extraction teams in motion, helicopters kicking up sand, silhouettes moving through smoke. No faces, no names, just the essence of what they'd done, captured without revealing what couldn't be revealed. Miranda moved slowly down the hall, listening to the echo of her boots against the floor. She turned into one of the new classrooms, where a group of fresh officers sat waiting. Lieutenant Mercer stood at the front, crisp and composed, briefing them on the day's exercise. She caught sight of Miranda and gave a small, respectful nod. The room quieted. "Ma'am," Mercer said, "would you like to say a few words before we begin?" Miranda hesitated for a moment, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted to choose the right words. These weren't speeches. These were inheritances. She stepped to the front, hands loosely clasped behind her back, posture unconsciously falling into that familiar command stance. The young officers watched her closely. "When you run this scenario," she began softly, "remember this. Extraction isn't about glory. It's not about heroics. It's about precision, discipline, trust. And sometimes it's about making decisions no one will ever know you made." Her gaze swept the room. "Your training will teach you techniques, but what will keep you alive and keep others alive won't be on the page, it'll be here." She tapped her chest lightly. "And here." She pointed to her head. The room was utterly silent. Not the kind born of obligation, but the kind that happens when words hit home. She nodded once to Mercer, who took over the briefing. Miranda slipped quietly to the back of the room and watched. Mercer was good, confident without arrogance, sharp but grounded. She reminded Miranda of Callahan in the way she commanded attention without demanding it. Watching her teach these new officers, Miranda felt something unexpected: continuity. Later that day, Miranda sat on a bench near the training grounds, watching a new extraction drill unfold. Smoke machines filled the air with artificial fog. Teams moved through mock structures, radios crackling. For a moment, it almost felt like watching her own team, but different. New faces, new energy. The legacy was moving forward, step by step, in boots that weren't hers. General Harris approached quietly and took a seat beside her, his hands folded over his cap. "They're good," he said. "They're learning," Miranda replied. He nodded. "They have the right teacher." She glanced at him with a small smile. "You always were good at recruiting unwilling instructors." He chuckled. "You can't hide brilliance forever, Captain. It has a way of finding its way back into the light." For a while, they watched in companionable silence as the teams maneuvered. "You know," Harris said eventually, "Spectre's story won't ever be fully public. Some parts will stay locked away for a long time, maybe forever." "I know," Miranda said quietly, "and that's okay." He looked at her. "Is it?" She met his gaze. "For a long time I thought acknowledgement meant everything had to be told, every line, every detail. But now I see it's not about that. It's about making sure the essence isn't lost, that what mattered, who they were, what they gave, lives on." Harris exhaled slowly, the weight of shared understanding hanging between them. That evening, Miranda returned to her apartment. The sky was painted with streaks of deep orange fading to violet. She moved through the quiet space like someone finally at ease in their own home. On the wall opposite her kitchen table hung the framed Presidential Unit Citation. Beneath it she had placed 5 small photographs. Callahan, Rodriguez, Way, Decker, herself. Not in uniform, just candid shots taken during rare quiet moments overseas, smiles in the middle of nowhere, faces half-lit by camp lights, humanity between missions. She stood before the wall, her fingers grazing the glass. For so long, she had been the only living keeper of their story. Now, she wasn't alone in it anymore. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Mercer. "Ma'am, the team completed the extraction drill in record time. Your tactics are changing the way they think. Thank you." Miranda read the message twice. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she turned to the window. Outside, Fort Braxton's lights twinkled like constellations, each one marking someone else's story unfolding. She sat down at the table, jacket hanging by the door. The night was quiet, not the haunted silence of the past, but the living quiet of peace earned. Her eyes drifted to the patch on the jacket, catching the faint reflection of the kitchen light. She whispered, almost unconsciously, "We're still here." And for the first time, the words didn't carry pain. They carried legacy. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply endures. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones told not through medals or speeches, but through the people who quietly pass on what they've lived. Miranda Reeves had walked through shadows. She had carried silence like armor, and when the world finally turned to look, she didn't demand glory. She simply stood, and the truth stood with her. The jacket remained. The memories remained. And somewhere in classrooms and training fields, in whispered stories between young soldiers, Spectre Group lived again.